Rathavinita Sutta. Chariots at the ready. So I have heard. At one time the Buddha was staying near Ragaha, in the bamboo grove, the squirrels' feeding ground. The bamboo grove was a major monastery near Ragaha. According to KD 1:22.16.1, it was offered by King Bimbisra as the very first monastery dedicated to the saga. Then several mendicants who had completed the rainy season residence in their native land went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. The Buddha said to them, the commentary says Jibmi means the Buddha's native land, but the word occurs at AN 6.54, PVR 14 minutes and 2.1 second, JA 537:26.1, and JA 546:43.1. where it always means one's native land. Given that Pua, the most famous teacher of their land, was unknown by Shriputta, it seems likely that it was somewhat remote. One of the Chinese parallels, MA9, describes him as of light skin and prominent nose, a description that might befit someone from the northwest of India. In your native land, mendicants, which of the native mendicants is esteemed in this way, personally having few wishes, they speak to the mendicants on having few wishes. Personally having contentment, seclusion, aloofness, energy, ethics, immersion, wisdom, freedom, and the knowledge and vision of freedom, they speak to the mendicants on all these things. They're an advisor and counselor, one who educates, encourages, fires up, and inspires their spiritual companions. Pua son of Mant, sir, is esteemed in this way in our native land. Although said to be the foremost Dhamma speaker, KN 1.196:1.1, CSN 14.15:2.14, few of his teachings are recorded. At SN 22.83, Nanda attributes his initial breakthrough to Pua, while a single verse is attributed to him at Thag 1.4. Pua was evidently from the same maternal clan as Agilimla, MN 86:12.12. This name does not seem to occur in Sanskrit texts, but Mavastu 3.377 spells it as Maitreya, a name shared with the Maitreya Sahit, the oldest ritual text of the Black Yajurveda. Now at that time Venerable Shriputta was sitting not far from the Buddha. Then he thought, Pua son of Mant is fortunate, so very fortunate, in that his sensible spiritual companions praise him point by point in the presence of the teacher, and that the teacher seconds that appreciation. Hopefully, sometime or other I'll get to meet Venerable Pua, and we can have a discussion. When the Buddha had stayed in Ragaha as long as he pleased, he set out for Svarth. Traveling stage by stage, he arrived at Svarth, where he stayed in Jeta's Grove, Anthapiyakares Monastery. Pua heard that the Buddha had arrived at Svarth. Then he set his lodgings in order and, taking his bowl and robe, set out for Svarth. Eventually he came to Svarth and Jeta's Grove. He went up to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. The Buddha educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired him with a Dhamma talk. Then, having approved and agreed with what the Buddha said, Pua got up from his seat, bowed, and respectfully circled the Buddha, keeping him on his right. Then he went to the dark forest for the day's meditation. Then a certain mendicant went up to Venerable Shriputta, and said to him, Reverend Shriputta, the mendicant named Pua, of whom you have often spoken so highly, after being inspired by a talk of the Buddha's, left for the dark forest for the day's meditation. Shriputta quickly grabbed his sitting cloth and followed behind Pua, keeping sight of his head. While similar actions are found elsewhere, they are not said to be done quickly, taram napo. Shriputta's urgency here reinforces the impression that Pua lived somewhere distant and visited the central regions only occasionally. Pua plunged deep into the dark forest and sat at the root of a tree for the day's meditation. And Shriputta did likewise. Then in the late afternoon, Shriputta came out of retreat, went to Pua, and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to Pua, "The following 7 purifications became one of the primary textual sources for the commentarial system of insight knowledges, Vipassananya, that became central to later Theravada meditation." It would be a mistake, however, to interpret this sutta in light of the insight knowledges, which were developed over 1,000 years. Reverend, is our spiritual life lived under the Buddha? Pua was a stranger, so Shriputta begins by establishing common ground before asking a series of questions to which he expects a negative answer. Yes, Reverend. Is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of ethics? The questions are framed in an unusual paired syntax, ki nu ko, vuso alternates with ki pan vuso. Certainly not. Well, is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of mind? Purification of mind is the development of absorption to abandon the hindrances, AN 4.194:4.1. Certainly not. Is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of view? Purified view is the right view of the stream enterer who has seen the Four Noble Truths, AN 4.194:5.1, and rejected the fetter of views of a self, Sakyadahi. Likewise, the 5 items from here down to knowledge and vision all refer to stream entry. This sutta departs from other early presentations in presenting these as a sequence, whereas normally they are different facets of the experience of stream entry. Certainly not. Well, is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification by traversing doubt? Doubt is one of the fetters overcome by the stream enterer, e.g. MN 64:6.4, since they have the confidence born of direct experience of the Four Noble Truths. Attitude 5.7 Purification by traversing doubt is said to be achieved by the practice of jhna. Certainly not. Is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path? From their own experience, a stream enterer knows what leads to the goal and what does not, hence they give up the fetter of misapprehension of precepts and observances. For Magmaga, see the debate between Brahmin students at DN 13 minutes and 3.1 second, which shows that this term is not unique to Buddhism. There is, however, no evidence that the sequence of purifications is found outside of Buddhism. Certainly not. Well, is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision of the practice? A stream enterer not only understands what the correct path is, they have actually practiced it, SN 55.5:3.3. Certainly not. Is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision? This is the vision of the Four Noble Truths at stream entry, SN 25.1:2.4. Certainly not. When asked each of these questions, you answered, certainly not. Then what exactly is the purpose of leading the spiritual life under the Buddha? The purpose of leading the spiritual life under the Buddha is extinguishment by not grasping. In other words, for arahantship, not stream entry. Reverend, is purification of ethics extinguishment by not grasping? Certainly not, Reverend. Is purification of mind? Purification of view? Purification by traversing doubt? Purification of knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path? Purification of knowledge and vision of the practice? Is purification of knowledge and vision extinguishment by not grasping? Certainly not. Then is extinguishment by not grasping something apart from these things? Certainly not. When asked each of these questions, you answered, certainly not. How then should we see the meaning of this statement? If the Buddha had declared purification of ethics to be extinguishment by not grasping, he would have declared that which has fuel for grasping to be extinguishment by not grasping. Compare the simile of the raft at MN 22:13.1. If the Buddha had declared purification of mind, purification of view, purification by traversing doubt, purification of knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path, purification of knowledge and vision of the practice. If the Buddha had declared purification of knowledge and vision to be extinguishment by not grasping, he would have declared that which has fuel for grasping to be extinguishment by not grasping. But if extinguishment by not grasping was something apart from these things, an ordinary person would become extinguished. That is to say, the goal is not the same as the path, but it cannot be attained without the path, for an ordinary person lacks these things. Well then, Reverend, I shall give you a simile. For by means of a simile some sensible people understand the meaning of what is said. Suppose that, while staying in Svarth, King Parsanadi of Kosala had some urgent business come up in Skita. Now, between Svarth and Skita 7 chariots were stationed at the ready for him. Rathavinita, which lends the sutta its title, is explained by the commentary as 7 chariots with horses at the ready, where Vinta has its usual sense of trained, readied. While the series of chariots forms a relay, the word Vinta does not mean relay. The term and the simile are unique to this sutta. Then Parsanadi, having departed Svarth, mounted the first chariot at the ready by the gate of the royal compound. The first chariot at the ready would bring him to the second, where he'd dismount and mount the second chariot. The second chariot at the ready would bring him to the third. The third chariot at the ready would bring him to the fourth. The fourth chariot at the ready would bring him to the fifth. The fifth chariot at the ready would bring him to the sixth. The sixth chariot at the ready would bring him to the seventh, where he'd dismount and mount the seventh chariot. The seventh chariot at the ready would bring him to the gate of the royal compound of Skita. And when he was at the gate, friends and colleagues, relatives and kin would ask him, "Great king, did you come to Skita from Svarth by this chariot at the ready?" If asked this, how should King Parsanadi rightly reply? The king should reply, "Well, while staying in Svarth, I had some urgent business come up in Skita." Now, between Svarth and Skita 7 chariots were stationed at the ready for me. Then, having departed Svarth, I mounted the first chariot at the ready by the gate of the royal compound. The first chariot at the ready brought me to the second, where I dismounted and mounted the second chariot. The second chariot brought me to the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. The sixth chariot at the ready brought me to the seventh, where I dismounted and mounted the seventh chariot. The seventh chariot at the ready brought me to the gate of the royal compound of Skita. That's how King Parsanadi should rightly reply. In the same way, Reverend, purification of ethics is only for the sake of purification of mind. Purification of mind is only for the sake of purification of view. Purification of view is only for the sake of purification by traversing doubt. Purification by traversing doubt is only for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path. Purification of knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path is only for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision of the practice. Purification of knowledge and vision of the practice is only for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision. Purification of knowledge and vision is only for the sake of extinguishment by not grasping. The spiritual life is lived under the Buddha for the sake of extinguishment by not grasping. When he said this, Shriputta said to Pua, "What is the Venerable's name? And how are you known among your spiritual companions?" "Reverend, my name is Pua. And I am known as the son of Mant among my spiritual companions." "It's incredible, Reverend, it's amazing." Venerable Pua son of Mant has answered each deep question point by point, as a learned disciple who rightly understands the teacher's instructions. It is fortunate for his spiritual companions, so very fortunate, that they get to see Venerable Pua son of Mant and pay homage to him. Even if they only got to see him and pay respects to him by carrying him around on their heads on a roll of cloth, it would still be very fortunate for them. And it's fortunate for me, so very fortunate, that I get to see the venerable and pay homage to him. A roll of cloth, saloka, is a unique term, and these are unique words of praise. When he said this, Pua said to Shriputta, "What is the venerable's name? And how are you known among your spiritual companions?" "Reverend, my name is Upatissa. And I am known as Shriputta among my spiritual companions." Goodness! I had no idea I was consulting with the venerable Shriputta, the disciple who is fit to be compared with the teacher himself. Fit to be compared with the teacher, Satakappa, is another term that is unique in early Pali. If I'd known, I would not have said so much. It's incredible, Reverend, it's amazing. Venerable Shriputta has asked each deep question point by point, as a learned disciple who rightly understands the teacher's instructions. Point by point, Anumasa, found several times above, is yet another phrasing unique to this sutta. This sutta has several features that, taken together, indicate that it is later than the bulk of the four Nikyas, many unique phrases, the hints that Pua is from a distant land, and most of all, the doctrine. The text here takes the set of 4 purifications at AN 4.194 and expands a view into 5 to make the 7 of the current sutta. Now, AN 4.194 lacks any mention of where the Buddha was at the time and hence was likely taught by Nanda after the Buddha's death. Then the set is expanded to 9, plus wisdom and freedom, at DN 34:2.2.6, one of the latest suttas in the Nikyas. Most importantly, the 5 items pertaining to stream entry are presented here as a linear sequence, anticipating the detailed analysis of stages of insight in later Theravada. Thus not only are the associated suttas late, this sutta is developed further than them. It is fortunate for his spiritual companions, so very fortunate, that they get to see Venerable Shriputta and pay homage to him. Even if they only got to see him and pay respects to him by carrying him around on their heads on a roll of cloth, it would still be very fortunate for them. And it's fortunate for me, so very fortunate, that I get to see the venerable and pay homage to him. And so these two spiritual giants agreed with each other's fine words. CMN 5 minutes and 33.4 seconds.